The tears fell silently onto the worn pages of Olivia Reed's Bible as the preacher's words about eternal rest echoed through the small whitewashed church of Promise Creek, Wyoming. The year was 1876, and at 26, Olivia never imagined she'd be widowed after just 3 years of marriage, left alone to manage a struggling homestead with winter approaching fast. She didn't notice the respectful glances from the townsfolk, nor did she feel the gentle autumn breeze that slipped through the open church windows. What she did sense, however, was a presence beside her as the service concluded. The scent of leather, pine, and open sky announced him before he knelt. "Mrs. Reed." His voice came low and respectful. "I didn't know Thomas well, but he was a good man. I'm mighty sorry for your loss." Olivia looked up through tear-blurred eyes at the man kneeling beside her pew. Mitchell Blackburn was tall and weathered, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a face that had seen its share of harsh seasons. He'd arrived in Promise Creek just 6 months ago, taking work at the Harrison Ranch outside town. She'd seen him occasionally at the general store or passing through town on horseback, but they'd exchanged no more than polite nods. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," she whispered, clutching her handkerchief tighter. "The winter's coming," he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Thomas mentioned your north fence needed mending and there's wood to be chopped." He paused, seemingly gathering courage. "I'd like to help, madam. No strings attached, just a neighbor doing what's right." Olivia's spine stiffened. Pride was sometimes all a widow had left. "I can manage, Mr. Blackburn." Mitchell nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. He stood slowly, his tall frame unfolding as he reached for his hat. "Of course, Mrs. Reed, but should you change your mind, my offer stands." Before leaving, he added, "Everyone needs help sometimes. Even the strongest among us." As he turned to leave, Preacher Williams approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "Olivia, dear, you know the church is here for you, but practical matters need tending and pride won't keep you warm when the snow flies." After the burial, Olivia returned to the empty homestead she had shared with Thomas. The small 2-room cabin felt cavernous without his presence. 3 years they'd had together after meeting in Cheyenne, where her father had taken her to sell goods. Thomas had been kind and steady, if not passionate. Their marriage had been one of mutual respect and growing fondness. The pneumonia had taken him swiftly, leaving Olivia with 20 acres, 6 chickens, 2 milk cows, and a broken fence line that wolves had already discovered. She looked at her hands smooth from her upbringing as a shopkeeper's daughter, now developing calluses from work she was still learning to do. That night, as wind whistled through the gaps in the cabin walls, Olivia sobbed into Thomas's pillow, overwhelmed by the mountain of tasks before her. When dawn broke, she rose with swollen eyes and a decision. Pride would not keep her fed through winter. 3 days later, Mitchell Blackburn rode up to find Olivia struggling with the axe, attempting to split logs for firewood. He dismounted without a word, walked over, gently took the axe from her hands and began to swing it with practiced ease. They worked in silence until noon, when Olivia brought out a simple lunch of bread and cheese. "I can pay you a little," she said as they sat on the porch steps. "Not much, but I don't want your money, Mrs. Reed," Mitchell interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Thomas helped me when my horse went lame on the North Trail last spring, said it was just being neighborly. I'm just returning the favor." Over the next weeks, Mitchell rode out to the Reed homestead whenever he could spare time from his duties at the Harrison Ranch. He mended fences, chopped winter's worth of firewood, and helped Olivia prepare the garden for the coming frost. They rarely spoke beyond what was necessary, but a rhythm developed between them, a quiet understanding. As October gave way to November, the first snow dusted Promise Creek. Olivia had just finished milking when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Mitchell appeared leading his horse and another laden with supplies. "Mr. Harrison sent some extra provisions," he explained. "Ranch had a good year." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Is that the truth, Mr. Blackburn, or your kindness disguised as your employer's?" A slight flush crept up Mitchell's neck. "Both, madam. Mr. Harrison did suggest it after I mentioned your situation." She nodded, accepting this compromise between charity and neighborliness. "You'd better come in for coffee then. It's turning bitter out here." Inside the cabin, Mitchell removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Olivia noticed how he ducked his head entering the doorway, how his large hands handled the delicate coffee cup with unexpected grace. He was a man of contradictions, hard physical strength coupled with gentle consideration. "You're not from around here originally," Olivia observed, breaking their comfortable silence. Mitchell shook his head. "Boston, originally. Father was a professor, wanted me to follow in his footsteps." A wry smile touched his lips. "Books interested me fine, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Headed west after the war." "The war changed many paths," Olivia agreed, thinking of her own father who had never quite recovered from Gettysburg. "And you?" Mitchell asked. "You don't speak like someone born to frontier life." "St. Louis, my father owned a bookshop." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "I was going to be a teacher before I met Thomas. We were going to build a proper house by next summer. He had the plans all drawn up." Mitchell's eyes softened. "He built good foundations here, solid work." "Yes," Olivia whispered, looking around the small cabin with new eyes. "Yes, he did." When Mitchell rose to leave, he hesitated at the door. "I'll be by tomorrow to check the roof. Storm's coming, according to old Charlie at the livery." "Mr. Blackburn," Olivia called as he reached for his hat. "Mitchell, thank you," he nodded, a small smile warming his features before he disappeared into the swirling snow. The winter of 1876 was brutal even by Wyoming standards. December brought freezing temperatures and howling blizzards that isolated homesteads for days. During one particularly vicious storm, Mitchell appeared at Olivia's door, half frozen after riding through the blinding snow to check on her. "You could have died out there," she admonished as she helped him remove his ice-crusted coat. "Promise, Thomas," he muttered through chattering teeth. Olivia froze. "What did you say?" Mitchell looked up, snowmelt dripping from his hair. "At the funeral, when everyone had gone. I knelt by his grave and promised him I'd make sure you were all right." Something shifted in Olivia's chest, not grief, which had become her constant companion, but a warmth she hadn't expected to feel again. "That was foolish and honorable in equal measure, Mr. Blackburn." "Most worthwhile things are," he replied with a tired smile. With the roads impassable, Mitchell stayed 3 days at the Reed homestead, sleeping on a pallet by the fire while the storm raged. They established careful boundaries, Olivia behind her bedroom door at night, Mitchell never removing more than his coat and boots in her presence. But during daylight hours, they talked as they had never done before. Mitchell spoke of his time fighting for the Union, of the nightmares that still woke him. Olivia shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her love of literature, and her hopes for someday having children. They discovered a shared fondness for Shakespeare and debated whether Romeo and Juliet was truly a love story or a cautionary tale. "Both," Mitchell concluded as they sat by the fire on the third night. "Love and caution aren't mutually exclusive." When the storm broke, Mitchell prepared to leave. Standing at her door, he seemed reluctant to step back into the world that kept them in their proper places, widowed homesteader and ranch hand. "Will you come to town for Christmas services?" he asked. "The Harrison family has invited you to join their table afterward." Olivia hadn't considered venturing beyond her property. "I haven't been to town since the funeral." "Perhaps it's time," Mitchell suggested gently. "The living need community, Olivia." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it lingered between them, an intimacy neither acknowledged. On Christmas Eve, Olivia wore her best dress, a blue wool that Thomas had always admired, and allowed Mitchell to help her into the wagon he had borrowed from the Harrison ranch. The church was aglow with candles, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Olivia found herself sitting in a pew that didn't feel hollowed by his absence. Mitchell sat beside her, respectful inches separating them, but his presence steady and reassuring. The Christmas dinner at the Harrison Ranch was boisterous compared to the quiet holiday Olivia had anticipated. Adelaide Harrison, the rancher's wife, took Olivia under her wing, introducing her to the other guests with warmth that eased her social awkwardness. "Mitchell tells us you were meant to be a teacher," Adelaide mentioned as they helped clear dishes. "We've been needing one desperately at the schoolhouse. Our last one left to marry a man from Denver." Olivia's hands stilled over the dishes. I haven't completed my training." "Honey, you know more than most folks around here. The children need someone who can read and cipher. The position comes with a small stipend and a room above the schoolhouse for during the week. You could still maintain your homestead." The idea planted itself firmly in Olivia's mind, taking root as she rode home with Mitchell under a canopy of winter stars. "You'd make a fine teacher," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "The children would be lucky to have you." "I'd be abandoning Thomas's dream," she replied softly. "Our dream?" Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "I don't think Thomas would see it that way. A dream isn't the land itself, but what it represents: security, purpose, a future. Teaching could give you that too." By February, Olivia had accepted the teaching position, splitting her time between the schoolhouse in town and her homestead. Mitchell continued to help when he could, and gradually, the boundaries between obligation and friendship blurred. Sometimes he brought books borrowed from the Harrison family library. Other times, she sent him home with fresh baked bread or mended shirts, Promise Creek noticed. Whispers followed them at church services, though most were kindly meant. Adelaide Harrison became Olivia's staunch defender, reminding gossips that proper mourning periods were luxuries frontier women couldn't always afford. "People will talk," Olivia told Mitchell one Sunday after services, as they walked toward her wagon. "Let them," he replied, helping her onto the seat. "We know the truth of things." But what was the truth? Olivia asked herself later that night that Mitchell Blackburn had become essential to her world. That sometimes she caught herself watching his hands as he worked, wondering how they would feel against her skin. The guilt that followed such thoughts was immediate and crushing. March brought the first signs of spring and with it, unexpected trouble. Olivia returned from teaching one Friday to find her chicken coop destroyed and half her hens missing. The tracks told the story: not wolves, but human predators. Sheriff Parker rode out the next morning. "Drifters, most likely," he concluded after examining the scene. "We've had reports from other outlying homesteads. I'd feel better if you stayed in town for a spell, Mrs. Reed." "I can't abandon my place," Olivia protested. "Then accept some protection," the sheriff countered. "I don't have deputies to spare, but perhaps I'll stay," Mitchell's voice interrupted from the edge of the yard where he'd arrived unnoticed. "If Mrs. Reed has no objection." The sheriff looked between them, his expression carefully neutral. "That would ease my mind considerable, Blackburn." Mrs. Reed, propriety warred with practicality in Olivia's mind. "The cabin has only one bedroom," she said finally. "I'll sleep in the barn," Mitchell offered. "It's warm enough now." And so began an arrangement that teetered on the edge of scandal. Mitchell moved his few possessions into the Reed barn, riding to the Harrison Ranch only for his daily work. Evenings found them sharing meals in Olivia's cabin before Mitchell retired to his makeshift quarters. Their conversations deepened during these shared evenings. Mitchell revealed that he'd been engaged before the war to a Boston girl who couldn't reconcile herself to his nightmares and his restlessness afterward. Olivia confessed that while she had respected and cared deeply for Thomas, their marriage had lacked the passion she'd read about in novels. "Is that terrible to admit?" she asked quietly one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Honesty is never terrible," Mitchell replied, "just sometimes painful, and you," she ventured. "Have you ever felt that kind of love, the consuming kind?" Mitchell's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Once," he said simply. "Recently?" The admission hung between them, neither willing to acknowledge its implications. April brought a frightening development. Olivia was returning from school when she noticed smoke rising from the direction of her homestead. Panic seized her as she urged her horse faster, terrified she would find her home in flames. Instead, she discovered Mitchell engaged in a standoff with three rough-looking men beside a campfire they'd built dangerously close to her barn. "This property is protected," Mitchell was saying as she approached, his rifle steady in his hands. "Move along." The apparent leader of the group, a scar-faced man with matted hair, spat on the ground. "Ain't no law says we can't rest here, cowboy. This here's a widow's place. Everyone knows that." "Then everyone knows wrong," Mitchell replied evenly. "This land belongs to Mrs. Reed, and she doesn't welcome uninvited guests." Olivia dismounted, her heart hammering. "Is there a problem, Mr. Blackburn?" The unexpected arrival of a woman seemed to give the intruders pause. The leader's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "Just explaining to these gentlemen that they've mistaken your hospitality," Mitchell said without taking his eyes off the men. After a tense standoff, the men reluctantly gathered their meager belongings and moved on, but not before the leader promised, "We'll remember this place." That night, as Olivia prepared for bed, a knock came at her door. Mitchell stood there, his expression troubled. "I need to move back into the cabin," he said without preamble. "Those men could return. The barn is too far for me to hear if there's trouble." Olivia knew he was right, but the implications sent her heart racing. "People will talk," she whispered. "People always talk," Mitchell countered. "Your safety matters more." They arranged a compromise. Mitchell would sleep by the fireplace, his gun within reach. A quilt hanging from the ceiling beams provided Olivia with privacy in her small bedroom alcove. Still, knowing he was just on the other side of that thin fabric barrier made sleep elusive. 2 nights later, their precautions proved necessary. Olivia woke to Mitchell's hand gently covering her mouth, his voice a bare whisper in her ear. "Someone's outside. Stay here." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Mitchell moved silently to the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. Seconds later, the sound of breaking glass shattered the night's quiet as a flaming bottle crashed through the window. "Get out!" Mitchell shouted, grabbing Olivia's arm and pulling her toward the door as flames leapt up the curtains. They stumbled outside just as more flaming missiles hit the roof. Gunshots erupted from the darkness. Mitchell pushed Olivia behind the water trough, returning fire as the silhouettes of 3 men became visible against the growing inferno of her home. In the chaotic minutes that followed, Olivia could only press herself against the ground, praying as bullets whizzed overhead. When silence finally fell, she raised her head to see Mitchell approaching one of the fallen intruders, kicking away a gun. "Are you hurt?" she called, her voice trembling. "Grazed my arm, nothing serious." Mitchell's face was grim in the firelight. "I'm sorry, Olivia, I couldn't save your home." Tears filled her eyes as she watched the cabin, Thomas's cabin, become engulfed in flames. At least we're alive. By dawn, neighbors had arrived to help extinguish the last embers. Sheriff Parker took the surviving intruder into custody, confirming they were the same group that had been terrorizing isolated homesteads throughout the territory. "You can stay with us," Adelaide Harrison declared, her arm around Olivia's shoulders, "for as long as you need." But it was to Mitchell that Olivia turned, her eyes questioning. "We'll rebuild," he said simply, as if there could be no question about it. "Better than before." In the weeks that followed, the community of Promise Creek rallied around Olivia. The schoolhouse room became her permanent residence while plans were drawn for a new cabin on her land. Mitchell spent every free moment clearing debris and preparing the foundation, often working by lantern light long after his duties at the Harrison Ranch were complete. May brought warm breezes and the first wildflowers. Olivia found Mitchell one Sunday, not at church, but at Thomas's grave in the small cemetery behind the church. He knelt there, hat in hand, lips moving in what appeared to be conversation. She stayed back, not wanting to intrude, but as he rose and turned, he spotted her. Embarrassment colored his features. I was just updating him, Mitchell explained awkwardly. Seemed right to let him know we're rebuilding. Olivia approached slowly, laying her own small bouquet of wildflowers beside the wooden cross. "And what did he say?" she asked softly. Mitchell met her eyes. That I should stop sleeping in the Harrison bunkhouse and build my own place, that a man my age should have roots. "Is that what you want, roots?" "I've been running from ghosts for a long time," he admitted. "Maybe it's time to let them rest." They walked together to the churchyard gate where Mitchell paused. "Olivia, I need to say something and I need you to hear me out." Her pulse quickened. "All right. I came to Promise Creek with no intention of staying, just passing through like I'd been doing since the war. Then Thomas died and I made that promise, and somewhere along the way." He took a deep breath. "I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying. "I know it hasn't been a proper mourning period," he continued. "I know people will judge. But I can't keep pretending I'm just being neighborly when every thought I have is about building a life with you." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "Mitchell, I don't expect anything now," he hurried on. "Just wanted you to know where I stand. I'm staying in Promise Creek whether or not you ever feel the same. I'll help you rebuild as a friend if that's all I can be." Olivia reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "I've been battling guilt for months," she confessed. "Guilt because Thomas was barely cold in his grave when I started noticing how the sunlight catches in your hair. Guilt because sometimes, in my darkest moments, I was grateful you came into my life, even though it took his death to bring you here." Mitchell's hand tightened around hers. "We can't control when love finds us, Olivia, only what we do with it." "I need time," she whispered. "Not to know my feelings, I know those all too well, but to honor what came before." "I've got nothing but time," Mitchell replied, bringing her hand to his lips in a gesture that sent warmth spiraling through her. June found the new cabin taking shape, larger and sturdier than the original. Mitchell had incorporated elements of Thomas's original plans, a gesture that touched Olivia deeply. The town buzzed with speculation about the nature of their relationship, but Adelaide Harrison's stern glare silenced the worst of the gossips. On the last day of school before summer break, Olivia returned to find Mitchell on her property, not working on the cabin but tilling a new garden plot. "What's this?" she asked, dismounting from her horse. "Thought you might want flowers as well as vegetables," he explained, wiping sweat from his brow. "Every home should have flowers." The simple gesture broke something loose inside her. "Ask me," she said suddenly, Mitchell's brow furrowed in confusion. "Ask you what?" "The question you've been careful not to ask these past months, the one you think is too soon." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, but certainty filled her voice. "Ask me now, Mitchell." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Slowly, he set down his tools and walked to her, taking both her hands in his. Then, deliberately, he knelt before her in the freshly tilled soil. "Olivia Reed, I have loved you through winter frost and spring rain. I want to love you through summer heat and autumn harvest, through all the seasons of all the years we have left. Will you marry me?" Tears streaked down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." He rose, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground, his laugh mingling with hers in the afternoon sunshine. They married in August, after the new cabin was completed. The ceremony was small, held in the same church where Mitchell had first knelt beside her pew. Adelaide Harrison stood as Olivia's witness, while Mr. Harrison supported Mitchell. Preacher William smiled broadly as he pronounced them husband and wife. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said as Mitchell kissed his bride. "Sometimes the greatest blessings come from our deepest sorrows." That evening, alone in their new home, Mitchell presented Olivia with a final surprise, a small library nook built into the cabin's main room, complete with bookshelves and a comfortable chair. "For the teacher," he explained, "and for our children someday so they'll love words as their mother does." Olivia's eyes filled with tears of joy. "How did I find you?" she wondered aloud. "You didn't," Mitchell replied, taking her into his arms. "I found you, sitting silent in that pew, and I knew then I'd do anything to see you smile again." By the following spring, Promise Creek had largely forgotten the scandal of how quickly the widow Reed had remarried. The new Blackburn homestead was thriving, with expanded fields and a small orchard started from saplings. Mitchell had left his position at the Harrison Ranch to work their land full-time, and Olivia continued teaching while carrying their first child. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, they visited his grave together. Mitchell stood respectfully aside as Olivia placed flowers on the mound. "I think he would approve," she said softly as Mitchell's arm encircled her waist. "He wanted me to be happy." "Then we're honoring his memory every day," Mitchell replied, his hand resting gently on the curve of her belly. As they walked back to their wagon, Olivia paused to look back at the church where her journey with Mitchell had begun, a grieving widow, a kneeling cowboy, and a promise that had grown into a love stronger than either could have imagined. "Sometimes I think about that day," she mused. "How close I came to refusing your help, how different everything would be." "I'd have been persistent," Mitchell assured her with a grin. "Some promises can't be broken, Olivia Blackburn, and some shouldn't be," she replied, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "Like the ones we made to each other." As they drove home under the vast Wyoming sky, Olivia leaned against her husband's shoulder, marveling at life's unexpected turns. From the depths of grief, she had found not just survival but joy. From loss had come renewal. From a moment of kindness in a church pew had grown a love that promised forever. And in the years that followed through the birth of their children, through drought seasons and plentiful harvests, through all the ordinary trials and triumphs that make up a life well lived, Mitchell Blackburn kept the promise he had made that day when he knelt beside a grieving widow and offered his heart. To love her through every season, to build a home worthy of her spirit, and to thank God every day for bringing her into his life. By their 10th anniversary, the Blackburn homestead had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Their 3 children filled the cabin with laughter, and the school where Olivia still taught part-time had doubled in size. The library nook Mitchell had built was now overflowing with books, and plans were underway for a larger home to accommodate their growing family. But on quiet evenings, they still sat together on the porch he had crafted with his own hands, watching the sun set over the land that had witnessed their beginning, both remembering that first promise made in grief and fulfilled in joy.